Here are places in the world that seem to exist on the boundaries of reality, spaces where the laws of physics become suggestions and the impossible manifests when no one is looking. The inverted forest was one of these places, a stretch of dense, ancient woodland that extended for miles in the mountains north of the small town of Shadow Vale. The official name on the map was Black Pine Forest Reserve, but local residents rarely called it that. The nickname inverted emerged decades ago when hunters reported inexplicable phenomena within its boundaries. Compasses pointing south when they should indicate north, shadows moving in the opposite direction to sunlight, and, more disturbingly, echoes that preceded sounds rather than following them. Scientists who tried to study these anomalies returned with damaged equipment and corrupted data. Eventually, the authorities fenced off the area, prohibiting entry with warnings mentioning geological instability and toxic gases, convenient explanations to keep the curious away, but which no one in town really believed. Attention! If you enjoy horror stories that will make you sleep with the lights on, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any episode of this spine-chilling series. Marina Cardoso, a 28-year-old documentary filmmaker specializing in unexplained phenomena, had grown up hearing stories about the inverted forest. Her grandmother, one of the few original residents of Shadow Vale still alive, told of people who entered the forest and came back different, not in noticeable physical aspects, but in small behavioral details, as if they were slightly displaced versions of themselves. They come back with the wrong eyes, the old lady would say, refusing to elaborate on what exactly that meant. When Marina received an anonymous email containing GPS coordinates inside the forbidden forest and a single sentence, "I found the entrance," accompanied by a blurry photo of what appeared to be a stone structure covered in unknown symbols, she knew she couldn't ignore it. Her career was stagnating, her independent documentaries barely generating enough views to cover production costs, and this could be the big discovery that would change everything. After 3 weeks of meticulous preparation, she assembled a small team. Lucas Mendez, her longtime cinematographer and childhood friend, Dr. Helena, an anthropologist specializing in ancient cultures and obscure symbols, and Rafael, a local guide who knew the mountains better than any official map. The day of the expedition dawned with a peculiarly red sky, as if the sun itself was trying to warn them. "Red sky in the morning. Traveler, take warning," Rafael muttered as he adjusted the weight of his backpack on his broad shoulders. The group met at the agreed point, a small clearing at the edge of the forest, far from the environmental checkpoints. Marina immediately noticed the tension in the air, not just the natural anxiety before a risky expedition, but something deeper, as if the environment itself resisted their presence. The birds were strangely silent, and even the insects, normally abundant at that time of year, seemed to have disappeared. "The equipment is working perfectly now," Lucas observed, adjusting his state-of-the-art camera, "but according to the stories, that will change once we go deeper." Helena, who until then had been absorbed in an ancient leather-bound book, finally spoke. "I found references to this place in 17th century manuscripts. The Portuguese colonizers called it the forest where God turns his back. The indigenous people of the region refused to enter here, believing it was a point where our world met with something else." Rafael, normally skeptical of local legends, discreetly made the sign of the cross before adjusting the compass on his wrist. "Let's go in before I change my mind," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And remember our agreement. At the first sign that something is really wrong, we return immediately. No discussion. Enjoying the story? Leave a like and share with friends who also love a good horror story. Every subscription helps us bring more content like this." The first few kilometers through the forest seemed normal, so normal that Marina began to question whether the legends were just folkloric exaggerations. The vegetation was dense, but not different from other mountainous forests. Tall pine trees formed a canopy that filtered sunlight in dancing patterns on the ground, covered with moss and colorful fungi. Lucas filmed methodically, capturing the natural beauty security of the place, while Rafael regularly consulted the GPS, ensuring they were heading in the right direction. It was Helena who first noticed something strange, stopping abruptly and tilting her head as if trying to hear something distant. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her normally confident voice now hesitant. The others stopped, trying to perceive what the anthropologist had detected. Initially, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but then Marina felt it, a subtle vibration in the air, like atmospheric pressure before a major storm, but constant and rhythmic, almost like breathing. Rafael checked his compass and frowned. "It started," he said simply, showing the instrument to the others. The needle was slowly spinning counterclockwise, completing a turn every few seconds, completely ignoring the Earth's magnetic field. Lucas tried to check the recordings made up to that point, but discovered that the camera, although apparently working, had not recorded anything beyond visual static in the last 20 minutes. "It's as if time was," he began, but couldn't find the words to complete the thought. "Distorted," Helena completed, her eyes now fixed on something beyond the trees ahead. "And I think we've found what we came looking for." Following Helena's gaze, the group saw what appeared to be an unnatural clearing in the dense forest. As they approached, the vibration in the air intensified, making their teeth ache and causing mild nausea. In the center of the clearing, partially buried in the ground and covered by centuries of vegetation growth, was a circular structure of black stone that didn't seem to belong to that place, or perhaps to any place on Earth. Its surface was covered with engraved symbols that seemed to subtly change when observed from the corner of the eye, as if the marks themselves were alive and aware of being studied. "This wasn't built by humans," Helena whispered, her scientific training momentarily forgotten in the face of the impossible. As she approached to examine the symbols, Marina felt a shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of a strange familiarity, as if part of her recognized this place from a forgotten dream. Rafael, normally the most pragmatic of the group, was pale, his eyes fixed not on the structure, but on the trees surrounding the clearing. "Look up," he said, his voice almost inaudible. When the others followed his gaze, they saw what had disturbed the experienced guide. All the trees surrounding the clearing were curved inward, their tops pointing toward the stone structure, as if attracted by an invisible force. More disturbing still, their shadows on the ground pointed in impossible directions, some even projecting upward, defying the laws of physics. "We need to record this," said Marina, recovering from the initial shock. But when Lucas tried to turn on the backup camera, he discovered that the batteries, fully charged that morning, were inexplicably dead. Their cell phones also didn't work, the screens displaying only geometric patterns that none of them recognized. It was then that they heard, or perhaps felt, the first call, a sound that wasn't really a sound, but a sensation that reverberated directly in their minds, as if something on the other side of that stone structure was finally perceiving their presence, and it was inviting them to enter. Don't miss the next episode. Subscribe now and be the first to receive notifications when we publish the continuation of this terrifying story. We shouldn't be here. Raphael's voice trembled slightly as he backed away from the stone structure. His years of experience in the mountains, facing unexpected storms and encounters with wild animals, hadn't prepared him for what he felt now, a visceral sensation that they were being watched by something that existed beyond human comprehension. Marina, however, was fascinated. She approached the structure, her fingers hovering inches from the engraved symbols that seemed to pulse with an internal light when observed directly. "This is impossible," she murmured, her voice mixing fear and admiration. "The symbols seem to change when I try to focus on them." Helena was already kneeling near the base of the structure, her notebook open as she frantically tried to copy the symbols before they changed again. "I recognize elements of cuneiform writing, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and even characters that resemble Proto-Sinaitic, but combined in ways that make no linguistic sense," she explained, the academic excitement momentarily overcoming her fear. "It's as if someone, or something, had created a language using fragments of all known human writing systems, but following a completely alien logic." Lucas, recovering from the initial shock, removed an old analog camera from his backpack that he had brought as a last resort. "Digital technology fails here. Let's try analog," he said, adjusting the focus manually. The familiar mechanical click of the shutter echoed through the clearing in a strange way. The sound seemed to come from all directions simultaneously, as if the space around them was distorted. More disturbing still, they all heard the echo of the click a second before the original sound itself, an impossibility that made Rafael make the sign of the cross again. "Inverted time," Helena whispered, her eyes wide. The legends mentioned this. Events happening backward, effects preceding their causes. Marina felt a drop of cold sweat run down her spine as she tried to process the implications. If time worked differently here, what else could be distorted? Reality, causality, the very laws of physics? As she contemplated these questions, she noticed something that had escaped her initial attention, a pattern in the ground around the stone structure. Carefully pushing aside the vegetation with her boot, she revealed what appeared to be a perfect circle of darkened earth, as if the soil had been burned in a precise pattern. "How long do you think this has been here?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Considering the erosion of the symbols and the growth of vegetation over the structure, I'd say centuries, perhaps millennia," Helena replied, still frantically copying the symbols in her notebook. "But," she hesitated, frowning, "something doesn't make sense. Some parts seem ancient, worn by time, while others seem recent, as if they had been carved yesterday." Lucas, who was now methodically photographing the structure from all possible angles, suddenly stopped, his face paling. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a specific section of the symbols. The others approached, and Marina felt her heart race as she realized what had disturbed the cinematographer. Among the ancient and incomprehensible symbols was something recognizable, a set of modern characters that clearly formed a date, the exact day they were there, but from the following year. "This is impossible," Rafael murmured, his voice almost inaudible. "Someone is playing with us. It has to be." But they all knew that no one could have reached the structure before them to carve that. The surrounding vegetation was intact, with no signs of recent disturbance beyond their own footprints. "Or perhaps," Helena suggested, her voice trembling slightly, "time here isn't linear as we think. Perhaps past, present, and future exist simultaneously in this place." "Do you want more stories like this? Don't forget to comment below what you thought and turn on notifications so you don't miss any episode. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing quality content. As they discussed the implications of that impossible discovery, the air around them seemed to grow denser, the vibration they had felt earlier intensifying until it became almost painful. The sound, or sensation they had perceived before, returned, stronger now, like a voice without words that reverberated directly in their minds. Marina felt an almost irresistible compulsion to touch the stone structure, her fingers tingling with a static energy that seemed to emanate from her own skin. Rafael noticed her expression and grabbed her wrist. "Don't touch," he warned, his tone more serious than she had ever heard. "My grandfather was one of the forest rangers who found the bodies of the last group that came here in 1976. He never talked about what he saw, but he started sleeping with the lights on and never entered the forest again. The official report said animal attack, but he swallowed hard. My grandfather once said when drunk that they were turned inside out, not just the bodies, but something deeper." A heavy silence fell over the group as they processed this information. Lucas instinctively checked the path they had come from, only to discover that he could no longer distinguish the trail. The trees seemed to have moved, closing the path behind them. "I think we should leave now," he said, his voice betraying the growing panic. It was at that moment that they all heard, this time with their physical ears, not just in their minds, a sound that shouldn't exist in that isolated forest. Approaching footsteps. Not human footsteps, but something heavy and irregular, as if whoever or whatever was approaching had a fundamentally different anatomy from human. The sound came from all directions simultaneously, making it impossible to determine its origin. "Form a circle, backs to each other," Rafael instructed, drawing a hunting knife from his boot. Helena clutched her notebook to her chest, as if it were a protective talisman, while Lucas positioned the camera, determined determined to document whatever was about to encounter them. Marina, in turn, felt a strange calm take over her. Not the numbness of paralyzing fear, but an almost supernatural clarity, as if part of her already knew what was coming. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until the air around the clearing seemed to ripple like heat over asphalt on a summer day. And then, emerging not from between the trees, but as if materializing from the air itself, they saw the first creature, a form that the human brain struggled to process, composed of angles that seemed to change when observed directly, with limbs that moved in impossible directions. It wasn't solid or transparent, but something between the two states, like an overlay of conflicting realities. And most disturbing, it had a face, or something that occupied the anatomical position of a face, that despite its alien configuration, carried an unmistakably human expression of deep horror and supplication. "Don't look directly at them," Helena whispered, her voice almost inaudible. In ancient traditions, looking directly at entities from other planes of existence allows them to establish a connection with your consciousness. But the warning came too late for Lucas, who, determined to document everything, had fixed his gaze on the creature through the camera lens. A strangled cry escaped his throat as he staggered backward, dropping the camera. "They're trapped," he babbled, his eyes now glazed and distant. "Trapped between here and there, and they want us to help them, to cross over completely." Marina grabbed her friend's arm, trying to bring him back to the present reality, but his eyes remained fixed on something only he could see. More creatures began to appear around the clearing, each more impossible to comprehend than the previous one, their forms defying the laws of Euclidean geometry. Rafael, knife in hand, seemed paralyzed, unable to determine how to face something he could barely comprehend, let alone injure. It was Helena who acted first, pulling from her backpack a small vial of salt she had brought as part of her anthropological research kit. "Salt circle," she instructed quickly. "It's a constant in practically all traditions of protection against the supernatural." Working frantically, the three formed a circle of salt around themselves and Lucas, who continued to mutter incoherently about the other version of the world and the inverted sky. Inside the improvised circle, the oppressive pressure decreased slightly, allowing them to think more clearly. "We need to get out of here," said Rafael, looking at Lucas's catatonic state with growing concern. "But I can't determine the right direction. It's as if the forest is constantly reconfiguring itself around us." Helena was frantically flipping through her notebook, comparing the symbols she had copied with references in her ancient book. "I think I understand part of this," she finally said. "It's not a portal as we initially imagined. It's an anchor." When the others looked at her with confused expressions, she elaborated, "These symbols speak of tying or anchoring, something that shouldn't be in our plane of existence, as if this structure was designed not to allow passage, but to prevent something from completely escaping into our world." Marina felt a shiver run down her spine as she processed the implications. "So these creatures, they're trapped between dimensions?" Helena nodded gravely. "And someone, or something, built this structure to keep them that way, neither completely here nor completely there." Rafael looked at the creatures that now surrounded the salt circle, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly interested in the humans. "Then why do they seem to want our help? Why don't they simply attack us?" It was Marina who realized first, a horrible understanding forming in her mind. "Because they aren't the invaders," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the stone structure. "They're the victim. Something trapped them here between worlds, and that something," she hesitated, the words almost refusing to come out, "is coming." As if responding to her words, the air in the center of the clearing began to condense, forming a dark mist that didn't reflect the sunlight filtered between the trees. The stone structure began to vibrate, the engraved symbols glowing with their own light, not the healthy glow of sun or fire, but a sickly luminescence, like the bioluminescence of deep-sea creatures. The creatures around the circle retreated, their impossible forms trembling like images on a television with a bad signal. The sound that wasn't really a sound, intensified, becoming almost unbearable, making Marina feel as if her skull was about to crack under the pressure. Lucas, still in his semi-catatonic state, began to laugh, a sound devoid of humor and laden with terrible knowledge. "He's here," he said, his voice no longer his own, "the guardian of the threshold, the one who keeps the world separate and feeds on those trapped between them." Helena grabbed Marina's arm with painful force. "We need to get out of here now," she urged, her face as pale as paper. "Whatever is coming, it's not something we should witness and remain sane." Rafael was already trying to lift Lucas, who had become dead weight, his eyes fixed on the mist that continued to condense in the center of the clearing. "Which direction?" he asked desperately, turning in a circle, all escape routes looking identical in the distorted forest. It was then that Marina saw, or thought she saw, a movement among the trees, a human figure watching them from a distance. Before she could draw the others' attention, the figure made an urgent gesture, pointing in a specific direction, and then disappeared among the trees. "That way," said Marina with a certainty she couldn't explain, pointing to where the mysterious figure had indicated. "Quick! We've reached the end of this episode. If you want to find out what happens next, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Leave your like and comment what you thought of this chilling story. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing more content like this. Until the next episode, if you have the courage to return.